Imagine this: a radiant pregnant wife, living in luxury with her millionaire husband, discovers a shattering secret that turns her perfect life into a nightmare. What if your best friend of 15 years was sleeping with your husband right under your nose? What if he wasn't just cheating, he was embezzling millions, forging your signature, and plotting to gaslight you into thinking you're crazy? And that's just the beginning. From hidden cameras in your home to unexpected twins and a web of lies that leads to federal arrests. This story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate empowerment will leave you on the edge of your seat. Buckle up for Shattered Trust, a 10-chapter drama packed with twists that'll make your jaw drop. You won't believe how this scorned wife turns the tables. If you're hooked already, hit that like button if you've ever felt betrayed. Drop a comment with your biggest plot twist prediction. Share this with a friend who loves juicy dramas. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. Let's dive in. Sarah Mitchell pressed her hand against the small of her back as she stepped out of Dr. Peterson's office, a soft smile playing on her lips. At 38 years old and 7 months pregnant with her second child, she felt more radiant than ever. The autumn sun filtered through the medical building's windows, casting a golden glow that seemed to match her mood perfectly. "Mrs. Mitchell," Dr. Peterson called from behind her. "Just a moment, please." Sarah turned, her designer maternity dress flowing gracefully around her growing belly. Even pregnant, she maintained the polished appearance that had once made her a successful marketing executive before she chose family over career 12 years ago. "Is everything all right, doctor?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying just a hint of concern. Dr. Peterson glanced at her chart, his brow furrowed slightly. "Your blood work shows some elevated stress markers. Are you experiencing any unusual pressure at home, or work stress during pregnancy can affect both you and the baby?" Sarah laughed softly, the sound musical and confident. "Doctor, I have the most wonderful husband in the world. Richard takes care of everything. This pregnancy has been nothing but joy." She patted her belly affectionately. "Lily is going to have the perfect little brother or sister." The doctor nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful. "Well, just make sure you're getting plenty of rest. These markers concern me, even if you feel fine. Sometimes our bodies know things before our minds do." As Sarah walked to her silver Mercedes SUV in the parking garage, she dismissed the doctor's concerns completely. Her life was picture perfect. Richard's tech company was thriving. They lived in a beautiful 6-bedroom home in the most exclusive neighborhood, and their 8-year-old daughter Lily was excelling in private school. What could possibly be stressful about that? The drive home through their affluent suburb reinforced her sense of security. Manicured lawns, luxury cars and driveways, and the kind of quiet wealth that whispered rather than shouted. Sarah had grown up middle class, but Richard's success had elevated them in a world she sometimes still couldn't believe was hers. She pulled into their circular driveway, noting that Richard's black Porsche wasn't there yet. Good. She could prepare his favorite dinner as a surprise. Tonight felt special somehow, like the perfect ending to a perfect day. Inside their marble-floored foyer, Sarah kicked off her designer heels and padded to the kitchen in her stocking feet. The house felt enormous when she was alone, its open floor plan and vaulted ceilings creating an almost cathedral-like silence. She loved these quiet moments before Richard and Lily came home, when she could savor the anticipation of their evening together. As she pulled ingredients from the refrigerator, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Jessica Chen. "Working late again tonight. This startup life is crazy. Give my love to Richard and tell him he owes me dinner for all the extra hours I'm putting in LOL." Sarah smiled as she typed back, "He better appreciate my best friend working so hard to make him even richer. We should plan a girls' weekend soon. I miss our talks." Jessica had been Sarah's closest friend for 15 years, since they met in a marketing seminar. When Richard needed a business partner for his app development company 3 years ago, Sarah had enthusiastically recommended Jessica. It seemed perfect, combining friendship with business, keeping the people she loved close. The afternoon melted away as Sarah prepared Richard's favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon, with roasted vegetables and homemade dinner rolls. She set the dining room table with their wedding china, lit candles, and arranged fresh flowers from their garden. Everything had to be perfect for the man who had given her everything. At 5:30, Sarah realized she'd forgotten to print the ultrasound photos from today's appointment. Richard would want to see them right away. She headed to his home office, knowing he kept the good printer there for his business documents. The office door stood slightly ajar, which was unusual. Richard was particular about keeping his workspace private. Sarah pushed it open, intending to quickly print the photos and leave. But Richard's laptop sat open on his desk, the screen glowing with an active conversation. Sarah's eyes fell on it involuntarily, and what she saw made her heart stop. The messaging app showed a conversation between Richard and someone named Jay. Intimate, explicit messages that left no doubt about their relationship. Sarah's hands began to tremble as she read message after message, describing passionate encounters, future plans, and expressions of love that were never meant for her eyes. Can't wait to feel you inside me again tomorrow night at the Ritz. Room 412 like always. I'll wear that red lingerie you bought me. You're so much more exciting than her. Sometimes I forget she even exists when I'm with you. After the baby comes, we can finally be together openly. She'll be so focused on being a mother. She won't even notice when I leave. Sarah's vision blurred as she sank into Richard's leather chair, her pregnant belly pressing against the desk. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her distress. She scrolled up through weeks of messages, each one feeling like a physical blow. The bathroom. She needed to get to the bathroom before she was sick. Sarah stumbled down the hallway, her perfect world crumbling with each step. In their master bathroom, the one she'd decorated with such care, where she'd taken countless happy photos of her growing belly, she collapsed onto the marble floor. The rain began then, as if the sky shared her anguish. Heavy drops pelted the skylights above, creating a rhythm that matched her sobbing. Sarah curled around her belly, protecting the innocent life inside while her own life shattered around her. How long had this been going on? How many lies had Richard told? How many times had she praised him as the perfect husband while he was betraying her with someone else? The worst part was the casual cruelty in his words. Sometimes I forget she even exists. Aidan, 12 years of marriage, building a life together, and she was just an inconvenience to be managed until he could openly be with his lover. Sarah forced herself to breathe deeply, thinking of the baby. She couldn't let her emotional pain hurt the child who depended on her. Slowly, painfully. She pulled herself up and splashed cold water on her face. She had to know who Jay was. Back in the office, Sarah scrolled through Richard's recent calls. Her blood turned to ice when she saw the pattern. Dozens of calls to Jessica Chen, often late at night, always when Sarah thought Jessica was working late. Jessica, her best friend of 15 years. The woman who'd been Sarah's maid of honor, who'd held Sarah's hand during her miscarriage 5 years ago, who'd helped design the nursery for this very pregnancy. Sarah's legs gave out again, but this time anger mixed with the devastation. How dare they? How dare Jessica look her in the eye, hug her, ask about the baby, all while sleeping with her husband? How dare Richard hold her at night, tell her he loved her, make plans for their family, while planning to leave her for another woman? The sound of the garage door opening sent panic through Sarah's system. Richard was home. She had to act normal, had to protect herself and the baby until she could figure out what to do. Sarah quickly closed the laptop and ran to the kitchen, grabbing a dish towel to hide her shaking hands. She could hear Richard's footsteps on the marble floor, the familiar sound that used to bring her such joy. "Honey, I'm home," Richard called out in that cheerful voice she'd loved for 12 years. "Something smells amazing in here." Sarah turned to face him, and for a moment she saw him as if for the first time. Richard was still handsome at 42, his dark hair showing just enough silver to be distinguished, his smile as charming as the day they'd met. But now she noticed things she'd overlooked, the way his eyes didn't quite meet hers, the expensive cologne that seemed different lately, the phone he clutched protectively. "How was your day, darling?" Sarah managed, proud that her voice sounded almost normal. "Oh, you know how it is," Richard said, kissing her cheek in a way that now felt mechanical. "Lots of meetings, lots of paperwork. Jessica's been working incredibly hard on the new project. I don't know what I'd do without her." The casual mention of Jessica's name hit Sarah like a slap. He was standing in their kitchen, surrounded by the dinner she'd lovingly prepared, talking about his mistress as if she were just a business associate. "She's such a good friend," Sarah said carefully, watching Richard's face for any sign of guilt. "The best," Richard agreed. "Loyal, dedicated, always available when I need her." His phone buzzed and he glanced at it, his face lighting up in a way that used to be reserved for Sarah. "Actually, I need to take this call about tomorrow's meeting. Don't wait dinner for me. It might be a while." He disappeared into his office and Sarah stood alone in their beautiful kitchen, the dinner she'd prepared growing cold on the counter. Through the office door, she could hear Richard's voice, lower and more intimate than it had been with her. Sarah walked to their sliding glass doors and looked out at their backyard. The rain was coming down harder now, turning their perfect lawn into a muddy mess. How fitting. She pressed her hand to the glass and made a decision. She would not confront him tonight. She needed time to think, to plan, to protect herself and her children. But she would find out everything. Going back to the office, Sarah waited until she heard Richard go to the master bedroom to shower. Then she carefully opened his laptop again and took photos of the messages with her phone. The intimate details made her stomach turn, but she forced herself to document everything. That's when she found it, in Richard's email, a confirmation for a hotel reservation. The Ritz-Carlton, room 412, checked in yesterday, checked out this morning. The name on the reservation, Mr. and Mrs. Richard Mitchell. Sarah's world tilted on its axis. Not only was Richard having an affair, but he was using her name, her identity, to do it. He was flaunting his betrayal in the most personal way possible. Her water broke then, warm fluid rushing down her legs onto the office carpet. But Sarah knew immediately that something was wrong. She was only 7 months pregnant. This was too early. "Richard," she screamed, all pretense abandoned. "Richard, help me!" He came running, his hair still wet from the shower, and for a moment she saw genuine panic in his eyes. Whatever else he'd done, he hadn't wanted to hurt the baby. "The hospital!" Sarah gasped as another wave of pain hit her. "Something's wrong." As Richard helped her to the car, Sarah caught sight of his phone on the passenger seat. A text message was visible. "Can't wait for tomorrow night. My love. Only 8 more weeks until we can be together forever." The message was from Jessica, sent just minutes ago. As they raced through the rain toward the hospital, Sarah realized that her perfect life hadn't just been shattered. It had never existed at all. Everything she'd believed about her marriage, her friendship, her future, had been an elaborate lie. But as another contraction gripped her, Sarah made a silent promise to the baby fighting to survive inside her. She would uncover every lie, expose every betrayal, and protect her children from the wreckage of her broken trust. The rain pounded against the windshield as they drove into the night, washing away the last remnants of Sarah's innocence. The emergency room at Riverside Medical Center buzzed with controlled chaos, but Sarah felt wrapped in a cocoon of pain and fear. The bright fluorescent lights hurt her eyes as nurses rushed her into a private room, their voices a blur of medical terminology that barely registered through her panic. "Mrs. Mitchell, try to stay calm." "Doctor," Amanda Rivera said, checking the fetal monitor. "Your baby's heartbeat is strong, but we need to stop these contractions. You're only 32 weeks along." Sarah gripped the hospital bed rails, fighting waves of pain that felt both physical and emotional. Each contraction reminded her of the messages she'd discovered, the hotel receipt, the casual way Richard had dismissed her existence to his mistress. "Is my baby going to be okay?" Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from suppressed sobs. "We're going to do everything we can," Dr. Rivera assured her. "But I need you to try to relax. Stress can make preterm labor worse. What triggered this? Any unusual stress or physical trauma today? Sarah's eyes found Richard, who stood in the corner of the room looking appropriately concerned while his phone buzzed constantly in his pocket. How could she explain that discovering her husband's affair had triggered false labor? How could she tell this stranger that her entire life was a lie? I, I fell down some stairs, Sarah lied, the words tasting bitter. I've been having some dizzy spells, Dr. Rivera frowned, making notes on her chart. We'll need to run some tests, but for now, I'm going to give you medication to stop the contractions. You'll need to stay overnight for observation. As the doctor left, Richard finally approached the bed. His face wore an expression of worry that would have convinced Sarah completely just hours ago. Now she studied every micro-expression, looking for signs of deception. "Honey, you scared me to death," Richard said, taking her hand. His thumb stroked across her knuckles in a gesture that used to comfort her. "When you screamed for help, I thought—" His phone buzzed again. Sarah watched his eyes flick toward it involuntarily before he caught himself. "Don't you need to answer that?" Sarah asked, her voice carefully neutral. "It might be important business." "Nothing's more important than you and the baby right now," Richard replied, but Sarah noticed he didn't silence the phone. A nurse entered with an IV bag and began preparing Sarah's arm. "This will help stop the contractions," she explained. "You should start feeling better soon." As the medication entered her system, Sarah felt her body beginning to relax, but her mind remained razor sharp. She watched Richard check his phone when he thought she wasn't looking, saw him type a quick message, noticed the way his face softened as he read the response. "Richard," Sarah said suddenly, "I've been thinking about the stress Dr. Peterson mentioned. Maybe we should talk about what might be causing it." Richard's hand stilled on hers. "What do you mean?" "Well, you've been working such long hours lately. All those late meetings with Jessica. I barely see you anymore." Sarah kept her voice light, conversational, but she was watching him like a hawk. "You know how it is with the business," Richard said, his tone becoming slightly defensive. "Jessica and I have been putting together a huge deal that could set us up for life. Sometimes we have to work around the clock." "Of course," Sarah agreed. "She's been such a good friend to both of us. I'm so grateful you can work so closely with someone we trust." Richard relaxed slightly, probably thinking he'd successfully deflected her concerns. She really has been incredible. So dedicated, so understanding of what the business needs. The door opened and Sarah's heart nearly stopped. Jessica Chen walked in carrying a beautiful bouquet of white roses and baby's breath, her face a picture of concern and friendship. "Sarah, oh my God, I came as soon as Richard texted me," Jessica said, rushing to the bedside. "How are you feeling? Is the baby okay?" Sarah stared at her best friend, this woman who'd been in her wedding, who'd helped her through her miscarriage, who'd spent countless hours planning this very pregnancy. Jessica looked exactly the same as always. Perfectly styled black hair, designer clothes that managed to be both professional and feminine. The warm smile that had drawn Sarah to her 15 years ago. But now Sarah saw things differently. The way Jessica's eyes lingered on Richard. The subtle way she positioned herself closer to him than to Sarah. The expensive jewelry that seemed new and far beyond what Jessica's salary should allow. "I'm better now," Sarah said carefully. "Just some early contractions. The doctor says stress might have triggered them." "Stress?" Jessica's concern seemed genuine. "What could you possibly be stressed about? You have the perfect life, amazing husband, beautiful daughter, this gorgeous baby on the way." The irony of her best friend listing all the things she was in the process of destroying wasn't lost on Sarah. "I know. I'm so lucky. Richard takes such good care of me." "He really does," Jessica agreed, and Sarah caught the subtle look that passed between Jessica and Richard. "You're so fortunate to have found a man who's so attentive to what women need." The double meaning in Jessica's words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Even here, in the hospital, While Sarah fought to keep their baby safe, Jessica couldn't resist these little cruelties. A nurse entered to check Sarah's vital signs. "Your contractions have stopped," she announced cheerfully. "The medication is working well. How's your pain level?" "Much better," Sarah replied, though the emotional pain was growing stronger by the minute. "Good. The doctor wants you to rest now. Visiting hours end in 30 minutes, so your family should probably head home soon." Richard stood up immediately. "Of course. Sarah needs her rest." He leaned down to kiss her forehead, and she caught a whiff of an unfamiliar perfume on his collar. "I'll be back first thing in the morning with Lily. She's staying at my mother's tonight." "I should go too," Jessica said, but she lingered by Richard's side. "Sarah, if you need anything at all, just call me. You know I'm always available." "Always," Richard agreed, his voice carrying a warmth that used to be reserved for Sarah alone. After they left, Sarah lay in the hospital bed listening to the steady beep of the fetal monitor. Her baby's heartbeat was strong and regular, a small comfort in her shattered world. She closed her eyes and tried to process everything she'd witnessed. The casual intimacy between Richard and Jessica was unmistakable now that she knew what to look for. The way they stood together, the meaningful glances, the coded language, it all pointed to a relationship that had been going on for months, maybe years. But what hurt most was Jessica's cruelty. The subtle digs, the gloating disguised as concern, the way she'd positioned herself as the other woman right in front of Sarah's face. This wasn't just about Richard's betrayal anymore. It was about losing the person she trusted most outside her marriage. Around midnight, a young nurse named Maria came in to check on her. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Mitchell?" "Physically better," Sarah admitted. "But I have a question. If someone wanted to, hypothetically, check on their husband's financial activities, how would they do that?" Maria looked surprised but not judgmental. "Hypothetically. Well, most couples have joint accounts, shared credit cards. You'd have every right to check on those. Why? I've been so focused on the pregnancy and taking care of our daughter that I haven't been paying attention to our finances. I should probably be more involved." "Smart thinking," Maria agreed. "My husband handles most of our money too, but I check the statements every month. You never know what might slip through the cracks." After Maria left, Sarah used her phone to log into their joint bank account. What she found made her stomach drop. Over the past 6 months, there had been massive transfers out of their savings account. 50,000 here, 20,000 there, all going to accounts she didn't recognize. Their retirement fund had been nearly depleted. The college fund she'd been building for Lily was completely empty. But the most shocking discovery was a transfer of $2. $3 million to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, dated just 3 days ago. Their entire liquid savings, gone. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled through the credit card statements. Expensive jewelry purchases from Tiffany & Co., charges at restaurants she'd never been to, hotel bills for rooms she'd never slept in, all while she'd been home, pregnant and trusting, believing her husband was working late to provide for their family. The final blow came when she found a charge for 2 first-class tickets to Monaco, dated for next month, the same month their baby was due. Sarah set down her phone and stared at the ceiling. Richard wasn't just having an affair. He was planning to abandon her completely, right when she'd be most vulnerable. He'd stolen their money, emptied their accounts, and was preparing to start a new life with Jessica while leaving Sarah to face single motherhood with nothing. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her distress. Sarah placed both hands on her belly and made a silent promise. She would not let them destroy her children's future. She would not let them get away with this. But first, she needed proof. Real, undeniable evidence that would hold up in court and in the court of public opinion. Richard and Jessica thought they were so clever, but they'd underestimated her. Sarah had spent 12 years as a devoted wife and mother, but before that, she'd been one of the most successful marketing executives in the city. She knew how to research, how to build a case, how to expose the truth in ways that would devastate her targets. Tomorrow, she would begin fighting back. Tonight, she would let them think they'd won. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah's last thought was a bitter smile. Richard and Jessica had no idea what was coming for them. The pregnant wife they'd betrayed was about to become their worst nightmare. Sarah woke to the sound of her phone buzzing on the hospital bedside table. The morning sun streamed through the windows, and for just a moment, she forgot where she was and why. Then reality crashed over her like a cold wave. The message was from Richard. Had to leave early for emergency investor meeting. We'll pick you up at noon. Love you. Love you. The words that had once made her heart skip now felt like mockery. Sarah deleted the message and struggled to sit up, her body still sore from the previous night's ordeal. Dr. Rivera appeared with a cheerful smile in Sarah's discharge papers. Good news, your contractions have completely stopped, and the baby's heart rate is perfect. But I want you on bed rest for the next week, and you need to avoid stress as much as possible. Doctor, Sarah said carefully, what you said yesterday about stress markers in my blood, how long would those take to develop? Several weeks, possibly months. Doctor, Rivera replied, whatever's been causing your stress has been building for a while. Even if you weren't consciously aware of it? Sarah nodded grimly. Her body had been trying to tell her something was wrong long before her mind caught up. After the doctor left, Sarah called her mother-in-law to arrange for Lily to stay another night. I just need a day to rest, she explained, hating the lies but knowing she needed time to investigate without arousing suspicion. At noon sharp, Richard appeared with flowers and his most charming smile. How's my beautiful wife feeling today? Better, Sarah replied, studying his face. Though I keep thinking about what might have caused the stress. Maybe I should be more involved in our finances. I feel so guilty that you handle everything alone. Something flickered in Richard's eyes, so briefly she almost missed it. Sweetheart, you don't need to worry about money. That's my job. Your job is growing our baby and taking care of yourself. But what if something happened to you? Sarah pressed. I wouldn't even know where to start. Maybe you could show me the accounts, just so I'm prepared. Sarah, honey, you're recovering from a medical scare. This is exactly the kind of stress the doctor told you to avoid. Richard's voice carried a note of irritation disguised as concern. Trust me, everything is perfectly fine. The drive home was quiet, but Sarah noticed Richard's phone buzzing constantly. Each time, he glanced at it with barely concealed eagerness before remembering she was watching. Their house looked the same from the outside, but Sarah felt like she was entering enemy territory. Every beautiful room, every carefully chosen piece of furniture, every family photo now felt contaminated by lies. Why don't you rest in bed while I catch up on some work? Richard suggested. I'll bring you lunch in a little while. Perfect. Sarah waited until she heard Richard's office door close, then quietly made her way to their bedroom computer. She had some investigating to do. The first shock came when she tried to access their joint credit card account online. The password had been changed. When she called the bank, they informed her that Richard had requested her access be temporarily suspended for security reasons just 2 days ago. The second shock came when she called their investment advisor, someone she'd worked with for 8 years. Mrs. Mitchell, Bob Harrison's voice was carefully neutral. I was actually planning to call you today. I wanted to discuss the major portfolio changes your husband authorized last week. What changes? Sarah's blood ran cold. The liquidation of your retirement accounts, the children's education funds, and the sale of your stock portfolio. I have to say, I was surprised you didn't call to discuss it first, given how involved you've always been in these decisions. Sarah gripped the phone tighter. Bob, I need you to be very clear. How much money are we talking about? Well, after penalties and taxes for early withdrawal, approximately $4.2 million was transferred to accounts I don't have access to. I assumed you and Richard were making some kind of major investment or purchase. $4.2 million. Gone. Bob, I need copies of all the paperwork for these transactions sent to my personal email immediately. And I need you to tell me, legally, Was my signature required for these withdrawals? Actually, yes. Your signature was on all the documents. I have copies right here. Sarah's hands began to shake. Can you fax me those signature pages right now? 10 minutes later, Sarah stared at documents bearing her forged signature. Richard had been practicing her handwriting, probably for months. The signatures were good enough to fool a bank employee who didn't know her personally. But Sarah knew her own handwriting, and this wasn't it. She was still staring at the fax documents when her phone rang. Jessica's name appeared on the screen. Sarah, how are you feeling? Sweetie? I'm okay, Sarah replied carefully. Resting at home. Good. Listen, I know this might seem like strange timing, but I wanted to talk to you about something important. Can I come over for a few minutes? Every instinct screamed at Sarah to say no, but she needed to know what Jessica was planning. Of course, Richard's working from home, so it'll be nice to have some girl time. 20 minutes later, Jessica arrived looking polished and confident in a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She settled into the living room chair across from Sarah with the air of someone who owned the place. Sarah, honey, I've been thinking about what you said at the hospital, about being stressed and not knowing why. Yes. Well, I hate to be the one to bring this up, but I've been worried about you for a while. You seem so isolated. You gave up your career. You don't have many friends outside of me and Richard. And now with another baby coming? Jessica paused, as if choosing her words carefully. I'm concerned you might be developing some kind of depression. Sarah blinked, genuinely stunned by the audacity. Depression? It would explain the stress markers, the early labor, even the paranoid thoughts you mentioned about wanting to check on your finances. Richard's told me you've been asking some strange questions lately. Richard discussed my questions with you. Oh, honey, don't be upset. He's just worried about you. We both are. Jessica leaned forward with fake sympathy. There are some wonderful therapists who specialize in pregnancy-related mental health issues. I could help you find someone. The manipulation was so breathtaking that Sarah almost admired its audacity. Jessica and Richard weren't just stealing her money and her husband. They were trying to gaslight her into thinking she was mentally unstable. That's so thoughtful of you, Sarah said slowly. But I feel fine mentally. In fact, I feel more clear-headed than I have in months. Something flickered in Jessica's eyes. Well, of course you think you feel fine. That's often how these things work. The person experiencing the depression is the last to recognize it. Jessica, can I ask you something as my oldest friend? Anything. If you discovered that someone close to you was lying to you, betraying your trust in the most fundamental way, what would you do? Jessica's expression didn't change, but Sarah caught the slight tension in her shoulders. I suppose it would depend on the situation. Sometimes people think they're being betrayed when really they're just misunderstanding things. Hormones can make us see threats that aren't really there. Hormones, Sarah repeated flatly. Pregnancy hormones are incredibly powerful. They can cause paranoia, mood swings, irrational jealousy. It's completely normal, but it can be dangerous if left untreated. Sarah stood up slowly, using her pregnancy as an excuse for the deliberate movement. Jessica, you've been my best friend for 15 years. In all that time, have I ever struck you as paranoid or irrational? Of course not, but... And have I ever given you any reason to question my mental health or judgment? Sarah, I'm not questioning, because I have to say, if my oldest friend suddenly started suggesting I was mentally unstable right around the time I began asking questions about my own finances, I might wonder if there was an ulterior motive. The mask slipped for just a second, and Sarah saw the real Jessica underneath. Cold, calculating, and absolutely ruthless. I think the stress is making you emotional, Jessica said, standing and smoothing her skirt. I should probably go and let you rest. But Sarah, I really think you should consider that therapy. For your own good, and for the babies. After Jessica left, Sarah sat in her living room and felt the last of her illusions crumble. They weren't just planning to leave her. They were planning to make her look mentally unstable in the process. If she tried to fight the divorce or the financial arrangements, they'd claim she was having a psychological breakdown. It was brilliant, actually. The pregnant wife, overwhelmed and hormonal, imagining betrayals that didn't exist. Who would believe her against Richard's word and Jessica's concerned testimony? Sarah walked to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, her hands steady for the first time in 24 hours. They'd made one crucial mistake in their planning. They'd underestimated her. Sarah had built million-dollar marketing campaigns, negotiated with Fortune 500 CEOs, and won awards for her strategic thinking. The skills that had made her successful in business were exactly what she needed now. And she knew something about Richard and Jessica that they didn't realize. She knew they were both arrogant enough to get careless when they thought they were winning. Sarah picked up her phone and made 3 calls. First, to a divorce attorney her sister had used. Second, to a private investigator. Third, to a forensic accountant who specialized in hidden assets. Then she sat down at her computer and began documenting everything. Every forged signature, every suspicious transaction, every lie she could remember. She printed bank statements, photographed the text messages she'd captured, and created a timeline of Richard's deception. By the time Richard emerged from his office that evening, Sarah had begun building the case that would destroy them both. "How was your day, honey?" Richard asked, kissing her cheek. "Jessica said she stopped by. She's worried about you." "She's such a good friend," Sarah replied, her voice perfectly calm. "Always looking out for me." "The best," Richard agreed. "What would we do without her?" As they sat down to dinner, Sarah watched her husband lie to her with practiced ease. But for the first time since discovering his betrayal, she felt something other than pain. She felt power. The pregnant wife betrayed was about to become the millionaire's worst nightmare. Sarah waited 3 days before making her move. 3 days of playing the obedient wife while Richard worked late, emergency meetings, and Jessica sent concerned texts about her mental health. 3 days of careful planning while her enemies thought they'd won. On Thursday morning, Sarah suggested meeting Jessica for coffee at their usual spot, a trendy cafe in downtown that held 15 years of friendship memories. The same place they'd celebrated Sarah's engagement, mourned her miscarriage, and planned Jessica's career moves. How fitting that it would also be where their friendship died. Jessica arrived looking polished and confident, sliding into the booth across from Sarah with her usual warm smile. "You look so much better. I was worried about you after our conversation the other day." "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Sarah said, stirring her decaf latte. "About what you said, about therapy, about my mental state, about paranoia." "Good. I'm so glad you're being open to help," Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You know what's interesting? Though I decided to test myself, to see if my suspicions were really just hormone-induced paranoia, or if there might be some basis in reality." Jessica's smile faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" "Well, I thought about the person I trust most in the world besides Richard. The person who would never lie to me, never betray me, never hurt me. And that person is you, Jessica. So I decided to ask you directly." Sarah leaned forward, her voice conversational, but her eyes laser-focused on Jessica's face. "Are you having an affair with my husband?" The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Jessica's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, calculation, and finally, a cold kind of relief. "Sarah, it's a simple question. Jess, yes or no? Are you sleeping with Richard?" Jessica's mask finally slipped completely. When she spoke, her voice was different, harder, without the artificial warmth Sarah had grown used to. "You really want to know the truth?" "I really do." Jessica sat back in her chair, and suddenly she looked like a completely different person. "Yes, I am. And you know what I'm not sorry?" The admission hit Sarah like a physical blow, even though she'd been expecting it. Hearing it confirmed was different from suspecting it. How long? Sarah asked quietly. 2 years, Jessica replied, and there was something almost like satisfaction in her voice. 2 years of giving him everything you couldn't: excitement, passion, ambition, a partner who actually understands his business instead of just spending his money. I gave up my career for our family. I thought that's what we both wanted. Jessica laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. That's what you wanted. You wanted to play house, to be the perfect little wife and mother. But Richard needed more than that. He needed someone who could match his energy, his drive, his vision for the future. Someone like you. Exactly like me. Jessica's eyes glittered. Do you know how long I've watched you take him for granted? How many times I've listened to you complain about his work schedule, his travel, his ambition? You have the most incredible man in the world, and you treated him like a paycheck and a sperm donor. Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, hot and clean. So you decided to console him. I decided to show him what a real woman looks like. Someone who appreciates his success instead of resenting it. Someone who can be a true partner in business and in bed. And the money. The $4.2 million that disappeared from our accounts. Jessica's smile turned predatory. Oh, that. Yes, I know about that too. Richard needed startup capital for our new venture. Our joint venture. Both business and personal. You helped him steal from his own family. I helped him invest in his future. Your future was always going to be limited. Sarah, you're getting older. You're having more babies. You're more dependent and less interesting every year. Richard deserves better than watching his life shrink to suburban mediocrity. Sarah stared at this woman she'd trusted for 15 years, trying to reconcile the person sitting across from her with the friend who'd held her hand through labor, who'd helped her pick out her wedding dress, who'd promised to be godmother to this very baby. You planned this, Sarah said slowly. All of it. Getting close to Richard through the business, gaining his trust, seducing him. I didn't have to seduce anyone, Jessica replied coolly. Richard came to me. He was starving for intellectual stimulation, for someone who could challenge him. You were just there, background noise in his life. And now we're going to be together openly. Richard is filing for divorce next week. He'll offer you a generous settlement, enough to buy a nice little house, maybe put Lily through state college. You should take it gratefully and move on with your life. Sarah felt something crystallize inside her, hard and unbreakable. And if I don't, Jessica leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper, then things will get very difficult for you. You're already showing signs of mental instability, the paranoid questions, the early labor from stress, the inability to handle basic financial information. It would be so easy to document a complete psychological breakdown. You'd destroy me to get what you want. I'd do whatever it takes to protect what's mine. And Richard is mine now. Sarah, he has been for 2 years. You've just been too self-absorbed to notice. Sarah sat back in her chair, studying Jessica's face. The transformation was complete. The woman across from her was a stranger wearing her best friend's features. There's just one thing I don't understand, Sarah said finally. What's that? Why are you telling me all this now? Why not just let me discover it during the divorce proceedings? This seems unnecessarily cruel, even for you. Jessica's smile turned genuinely warm for the first time in the conversation. Because I want you to understand exactly how thoroughly you've lost. I want you to know that I'm better than you in every way that matters to Richard. And I want you to spend every day for the rest of your life knowing that your best friend took your husband and your life, and there's nothing you can do about it. Sarah nodded slowly, as if absorbing this information. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. That's a fascinating perspective, Jessica. Really enlightening. She tapped the screen and Jessica's voice filled the air. Yes, I am. And you know what, I'm not sorry. Jessica's face went white. You recorded me? I recorded everything, Sarah said calmly. Every admission, every threat, Every detail about the stolen money and the planned psychological manipulation. Amazing how much criminals will confess when they think they've already won. You can't use that in court. It's illegal to record someone without consent. Sarah smiled for the first time in days. Actually, in this state, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. I studied the law quite carefully before this meeting, but you're right that this recording might not be admissible in divorce court. Jessica looked relieved for a moment. However, Sarah continued, it would be perfectly acceptable for me to play this for Richard's business partners, his investors, his clients, your colleagues, our mutual friends, Lily's school parents, my mother-in-law, and anyone else who might be interested in knowing exactly what kind of person you really are. The color drained completely from Jessica's face. You wouldn't try me. Sarah's voice was steel wrapped in silk. You see, Jessica, you made a crucial error in your planning. You assumed I was weak because I chose family over career. You thought I was stupid because I trusted the people I loved. But weakness and stupidity aren't the same thing, and you're about to learn the difference. Sarah stood up, her pregnancy making the movement deliberate and powerful rather than awkward. I'll see you in court, Jessica. And when this is over, everyone will know exactly who you are and what you've done. You wanted to destroy my life. Let's see how yours holds up under the same scrutiny. As Sarah walked away, she heard Jessica call after her. Sarah, wait, we can work something out. But Sarah didn't turn around. She had work to do, and not much time to do it. The pregnant wife betrayed had just declared war, and she intended to win. That evening, Sarah waited until Richard left for what he claimed was a client dinner, though she knew from the cologne he'd applied and the care he'd taken with his appearance that it was actually a romantic evening with Jessica. She watched from their bedroom window as his Porsche disappeared down their tree-lined street. Then she moved into action. For the first time in 2 years, Sarah broke into Richard's private basement office. The room was exactly as she remembered. Dark wood paneling, expensive leather furniture, and state-of-the-art computer equipment. Richard had always been paranoid about privacy, installing a separate security system for this space and making it clear that even Sarah wasn't welcome here. Now she understood why. Sarah sat down at Richard's desktop computer, grateful for the years she'd watched him type his passwords. His arrogance had always been his weakness. He used the same password for everything, Success 2023, as if he was afraid he might forget his own ambition. The computer unlocked immediately, and Sarah began her search. The first thing she found was a folder labeled Exit Strategy that made her blood run cold. Inside were detailed plans for disappearing with the embezzled money, complete with new identities, offshore accounts, and properties in non-extradition countries. But it was the timeline that truly shocked her. Richard had been planning this for over 3 years. Long before Jessica entered the picture, the affair wasn't the cause of his betrayal. It was just a convenient addition to an already established plan to abandon his family and start over. Sarah scrolled through document after document, each one revealing a new layer of deception. Forged signatures on loan applications, shell companies created to hide assets, business deals that existed only on paper to justify moving money offshore. Her husband wasn't just a cheating husband, he was a sophisticated white-collar criminal. Then she found the diary. Richard had kept detailed notes about his manipulation tactics, written with the clinical detachment of a psychological researcher. Sarah's hands trembled as she read entries about her own life. Sarah becoming suspicious about late nights, need to increase gaslighting about her hormonal behavior. Jessica suggested we plant seeds about postpartum depression for later use. Successful transfer of $500K today. Sarah didn't notice when I told her it was for business expansion. Her financial naivety continues to be useful. Date with Jessica at the Ritz tonight. Told Sarah I had food poisoning and couldn't eat dinner with her. She brought me soup in bed afterward. The irony is delicious. Need to accelerate timeline. Sarah's pregnancy means we have limited window before her maternal instincts make her more observant. Jessica agrees. Better to move now while S is distracted and vulnerable. Each entry was a knife to her heart, but Sarah forced herself to read every word. She photographed each page, each document, each piece of evidence that revealed the scope of their betrayal. But the worst discovery was still to come. In a locked drawer, which opened easily with a hairpin, just like Richard to use expensive furniture with cheap locks, Sarah found Richard's real will, the one he'd hidden from his lawyer, from her, from everyone. According to this document, dated just 6 months ago, Richard left everything to Jessica Chen, designated as his business partner and companion. Sarah and the children were mentioned only to be specifically excluded from any inheritance. But there was more. A handwritten note in Richard's distinctive scrawl. If anything happens to me before the divorce is final, make sure Sarah never sees a penny. She deserves nothing after wasting the best years of my life. Sarah sat back in the leather chair, staring at the evidence of her husband's complete contempt for her and their children. This wasn't just about passion or midlife crisis. This was calculated, methodical destruction of everything she'd believed about their life together. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Dinner running late. Don't wait up. Love you. Love you. Even now, even while he was probably in bed with Jessica, he continued the charade. Sarah was about to close the drawer when she noticed something else, a small digital camera hidden beneath some papers. She turned it on and scrolled through the photos, expecting to find more evidence of the affair. Instead, she found something far worse. The camera contained hundreds of photos of Sarah herself, taken without her knowledge. Sarah in the shower, Sarah changing clothes, Sarah sleeping, but also photos of her daily routines, leaving for doctor's appointments, picking up Lily from school, grocery shopping. Richard had been stalking his own wife, documenting her patterns and habits with the thoroughness of a private investigator. Some photos were time-stamped from over a year ago, proving this surveillance had been going on far longer than the affair. The final photos on the camera made Sarah's blood freeze. They showed her in the hospital just days ago, taken from the parking lot through a telephoto lens. Richard had documented her medical emergency, her vulnerable moments, her pain, and from the angle and timing, it was clear he'd left the hospital and returned with a camera. While she'd been fighting to save their baby, he'd been treating her medical crisis like a photo opportunity. Sarah's hands shook as she copied the photos to a USB drive. The man she'd been married to for 12 years wasn't just a criminal. He was a predator who'd been stalking and documenting his own family. A sound from upstairs made her freeze. Footsteps in the kitchen. Richard was home early. Sarah quickly shut down the computer and gathered the evidence she'd printed, her heart pounding. She could hear Richard moving around upstairs, probably looking for her. "Sarah, I'm home," his voice called out, warm and loving, the same voice that had whispered sweet promises while planning to destroy her. "Coming," Sarah called back, shoving the USB drive into her pocket and making sure the office looked exactly as she'd found it. She climbed the stairs on shaking legs, her mind racing. How long had he been watching her? How much did he know about her investigation? And how long before he realized someone had been in his office? Richard stood in the kitchen, still wearing his suit but with his tie loosened. He looked like a successful businessman coming home to his loving family, except Sarah could now see the calculation behind his smile. "How was dinner?" she asked, proud that her voice sounded normal. "Boring client stuff," Richard replied, but Sarah caught the subtle scent of Jessica's perfume on his clothes. "How are you feeling? Any more contractions?" "No, I'm fine. I spent the evening reading baby books." The lie came easily now. Richard kissed her cheek, and Sarah had to fight not to recoil. "I'm glad you're taking it easy. We need to keep you and the baby healthy." "Of course," Sarah agreed. "This baby is the most important thing in the world to me." "To both of us," Richard said, his hand resting on her belly. But Sarah noticed how quickly he pulled away, how his touch felt mechanical rather than loving. As they went through their bedtime routine, brushing teeth, changing clothes, the domestic rituals of a 12-year marriage, Sarah marveled at how well Richard played his part. If she hadn't discovered his true nature, she might have continued believing in their happy marriage for years. But lying in bed next to him that night, listening to his breathing slow into sleep, Sarah felt like she was sharing a bed with a dangerous stranger. Every sound he made, every movement, reminded her of the photos he'd taken, the surveillance he'd conducted, the clinical way he documented her life while planning to destroy it. Around 2 a.m., Richard's phone buzzed with a text message. In his sleep, he reached for it automatically, and Sarah saw Jessica's name on the screen along with a preview of the message. Can't wait for tomorrow night. I bought something special to celebrate our... The rest was cut off, but Sarah didn't need to see more. Tomorrow night was Friday, exactly 1 week since she'd discovered the affair. They were probably planning to celebrate the successful completion of their deception, but Sarah had different plans for tomorrow night. She slipped out of bed and padded to the bathroom, where she called her divorce attorney on her cell phone. Margaret, it's Sarah Mitchell. I know it's late, but I need to move up our timeline. Can we file the papers tomorrow? That's very fast. Sarah, are you sure you're ready? Sarah looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, pale, exhausted, but with steel in her eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. I'm ready. And Margaret, we need to add charges of fraud, embezzlement, and stalking to the filing. I have evidence. Stalking Sarah? That's very serious. So is everything he's done to me. File the papers tomorrow afternoon. I want him served at his office, in front of his business partners. And the restraining order. Absolutely. I want him out of this house by tomorrow night. After hanging up, Sarah returned to bed and lay awake until dawn, planning her next moves. The pregnant wife betrayed was about to become the millionaire's public humiliation, and she was going to enjoy every minute of it. Friday morning dawned gray and overcast, matching Sarah's mood perfectly as she prepared for the most important day of her life. Richard had left early for the office, kissing her goodbye with the same loving smile that had once made her heart flutter and now made her skin crawl. Have a good day, sweetheart, he'd said. I'll probably be late tonight. Big presentation to the investors. Sarah had smiled and wished him luck, all while knowing that his day was about to become a living nightmare. At exactly 10 a.m., Sarah's divorce attorney, Margaret Chen, no relation to Jessica, a coincidence that struck Sarah as poetic justice, arrived at the house with a team of forensic accountants and a private investigator. Are you ready for this, Sarah? Margaret asked as they set up their equipment in the dining room. Once we start this process, there's no going back. Richard will know you're serious. I've never been more ready for anything in my life, Sarah replied, handing over the USB drives and printed documents she'd gathered. What's our timeline? The forensic team will need about 6 hours to trace all the hidden assets. The private investigator is already watching Richard's office in Jessica's apartment. The divorce papers and restraining order will be served at 3 p.m., just as Richard's investor meeting begins. Sarah nodded, satisfied. She'd learned enough from Richard's manipulation tactics to appreciate the importance of timing and public pressure. While the team worked, Sarah called her sister Lisa in Chicago. I need you to come to Seattle immediately, Sarah said without preamble. Sarah, what's wrong? Is it the baby? The baby's fine. The husband is the problem. Lisa, I need you to pick up Lily from school today and take her to your house for a few weeks. I'm about to blow up her father's life, and I don't want her to see the fallout. There was a pause. Sarah, what's happening? Richard's been having an affair with Jessica for 2 years. He's stolen over $4 million from our accounts. He's been planning to abandon us right after the baby's born, and I'm about to destroy him. Jesus Christ, I'll be on the next flight. At 1 p.m., Sarah received a call from the forensic accountant. Mrs. Mitchell, you need to see this. We found evidence of a much larger conspiracy than we initially thought. Sarah joined the team in the dining room, where financial documents covered every surface like the world's most devastating puzzle. Your husband hasn't just been stealing from your family accounts, the accountant explained. He's been embezzling from his own company. We've traced over $8 million in fraudulent transactions over the past 3 years. $8 million! Sarah's voice was weak. The business is completely insolvent, He's been using investor money to fund his personal lifestyle and the affair. When this comes out, it won't just be a divorce case. It'll be a federal investigation. Sarah sank into a chair, overwhelmed. What does this mean for his employees, for the people who invested in his company? I'm afraid they're going to lose everything. Your husband has essentially been running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. Margaret placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. Sarah, this is bigger than we anticipated. Are you prepared for the media attention this is going to generate? When $8 million goes missing from a tech company, it makes headlines. Sarah thought about all the employees at Richard's company who'd believed in him, who'd worked late nights and weekends to build something they thought was real. She thought about the investors who'd trusted him with their retirement funds. She thought about Jessica, who might not have known about the full scope of the fraud. Then she thought about the photos Richard had taken of her, the clinical way he documented her life while planning to destroy it, the contempt in his written words about her and their children. Let it make headlines, Sarah said firmly. The world needs to know what kind of man he really is. At 2:45 p.m., Sarah positioned herself at the living room window with a clear view of the street. At exactly 3 p.m., she watched a sheriff's deputy walk up to their front door. But the deputy wasn't there to serve papers on Richard. He was there to inform Sarah that Richard had been arrested at his office. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband has been taken into custody on charges of fraud and embezzlement. The FBI executed a search warrant on his business this afternoon. Sarah stared at the deputy, momentarily speechless. The FBI? Yes, ma'am. Apparently someone tipped them off about suspicious financial activity. There's also a woman named Jessica Chen being questioned as a potential co-conspirator. Margaret appeared at Sarah's shoulder. We didn't call the FBI, she said quietly. Then who did? The answer came an hour later when Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Richard's number, but the voice on the other end was Jessica's. Sarah, I need to talk to you. Right now. Jessica, Sarah was genuinely confused. Where are you? Where's Richard? I'm at the police station. Richard's been arrested. Sarah, I had no idea about the embezzlement. You have to believe me. I don't have to believe anything. Listen to me. Jessica's voice was desperate, all her earlier confidence gone. I called the FBI. This morning, after our conversation yesterday, I went through Richard's files at the office. I found evidence that he's been stealing from the company for years, long before our affair started. Sarah felt the world tilt again. You turned him in. I had to. Sarah, if I didn't report it, I'd go to prison as an accessory. Richard was using me, using our relationship to hide his crimes. I thought we were partners, but I was just another victim. So you decided to save yourself. I decided to do the right thing. Jessica's voice cracked. Sarah, he was planning to frame me for the embezzlement. I found a document on his computer. He was going to claim I manipulated him into stealing the money to fund our affair. He was going to destroy both of us and disappear with everything. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to process this new information. Jessica, why are you calling me? Because I need your help. The FBI wants to know about your marriage, about whether you knew anything about the financial crimes. Sarah, if you tell them I warned you about Richard's mental manipulation, if you corroborate that he was planning to gaslight you about your mental health, it could help both of us. Help both of us. You could get your money back. All of it. If Richard goes to prison for fraud, you might be able to recover the stolen funds as a victim of the crime. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Finally, she spoke. Jessica, you betrayed our 15-year friendship. You slept with my husband while I was pregnant. You helped him plan to destroy my mental health and steal my children's future. And now you want me to help you avoid the consequences of your choices? Sarah, please. The answer is no. You made your choices. Now live with them. And Jessica, when the FBI asks me about you, I'm going to tell them the truth, that you were Richard's willing partner in every aspect of his betrayal, including the plan to frame me as mentally unstable. Sarah hung up and immediately called Margaret. I need to talk to the FBI. Today, I have evidence that Jessica Chen was not just Richard's mistress, she was his co-conspirator in planning my psychological destruction. As evening fell, Sarah stood in her empty house, Richard in jail, Lily safe with her aunt, the forensic team gone with boxes of evidence, and felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Peace. The millionaire's empire was crumbling. His affair was national news, and his carefully constructed facade was in ruins. But for the first time since discovering his betrayal, Sarah felt like she could breathe. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. You'll pay for destroying everything." Sarah looked at the message and smiled. She forwarded it immediately to the FBI agent handling Richard's case, along with a note. "I believe this constitutes harassment and possibly a threat from Richard Mitchell, currently in federal custody." Then she poured herself a glass of milk, put her feet up, and began planning her new life. The pregnant wife betrayed had won the first battle, but she had a feeling the war was just beginning. The stress of the past week finally caught up with Sarah at 3 a.m. Saturday morning. She woke to familiar contractions, but this time they felt different, stronger, more purposeful. At 33 weeks pregnant, she was still too early, but her body seemed determined to bring her child into the world. "Not yet, sweetheart," Sarah whispered to her belly as she called 911. "Mommy needs a little more time to make the world safe for you." The ambulance ride to the hospital was a blur of pain and panic, complicated by the media circus that had erupted around Richard's arrest. Sarah's pregnancy and the dramatic collapse of her marriage had become front-page news, and photographers were camped outside their house. Dr. Rivera met Sarah in the emergency room with concern and determination. "Sarah, we're going to do everything we can to stop this labor, but I need you to stay calm. How's your stress level been?" Sarah almost laughed at the understatement. "Well, my husband was arrested for embezzling $8 million. My best friend has been having an affair with him for 2 years. The FBI is investigating my finances, and there are reporters camped outside my house. Other than that, I'm feeling very zen." "Good Lord," Dr. Rivera muttered, checking the fetal monitor. "Let's get you stabilized and see what we can do about keeping this baby cooking a little longer." As the medical team worked around her, Sarah closed her eyes and tried to focus on positive thoughts. But every time she began to relax, her phone buzzed with another call from reporters, lawyers, or FBI agents. Finally, Margaret Chen arrived and took control of the situation. "All calls go through me now," Margaret announced, confiscating Sarah's phone. "You focus on staying pregnant. I'll handle the circus outside." "Any word on Richard?" Sarah asked between contractions. "He's been denied bail. The prosecutor argued he's a flight risk, given the offshore accounts and fake passport they found in his office safe. Jessica, on the other hand, made bail this morning. She's out. Her family posted the money. But Sarah, there's something else you need to know. The FBI searched your house this morning." Sarah's heart skipped. "What did they find? Nothing incriminating against you. Your financial records support your claims that you had no knowledge of the embezzlement, but they did find something interesting in Richard's basement office." Margaret pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a series of photographs. Hidden cameras, professional surveillance equipment. "Sarah, Richard was recording you in your own home for over a year." The violation hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Recording me where?" "Everywhere. The bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. Hours of footage of you going about your daily life, completely unaware you were being watched." "Why?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "The FBI thinks he was documenting your behavior to support an eventual claim that you were mentally unstable. If you'd tried to fight the divorce or question the financial arrangements, he could have presented edited footage to make you look paranoid or erratic." Another contraction gripped Sarah, stronger than before. "Margaret, I need you to promise me something. Anything. If something happens to me, if these babies come too early, I need you to make sure Richard never gets custody. Promise me." "Sarah, you're going to be fine. Promise me." Sarah gripped Margaret's hand. "I've read about men like him, narcissistic sociopaths who use their children as weapons. I won't let him destroy Lily and this baby the way he tried to destroy me. I promise. But you're going to raise these children yourself, and Richard is going to prison for a very long time. The contractions continued for 6 hours before finally stopping. As Sarah drifted in and out of exhausted sleep, she became aware of voices in the hallway outside her room. Complete financial ruin. Employees losing their life savings. Victims of his fraud want to sue the wife. Sarah's eyes snapped open. Margaret was speaking in hushed tones with someone else. "What's happening out there?" Sarah called out. Margaret entered the room looking grim. "Sarah, we have a problem. Some of Richard's victims are claiming you must have known about the embezzlement. They're talking about filing civil suits against you to recover their losses." "But I didn't know." "I believe you, and the FBI believes you. But civil court has a lower burden of proof. These people lost their retirement savings, their children's college funds. They're looking for anyone to blame. And as Richard's wife, you're a target." Sarah struggled to sit up. "What does that mean for me and the children?" "It means we need to be very careful about how we handle the divorce proceedings. If we're too aggressive about seizing assets, it could look like you're trying to hide money from the victims." "Margaret, I don't want money that was stolen from innocent people. If there are assets that can be recovered for the victims, they should get them." "That's admirable, Sarah. But you have 2 children to think about. The house, your personal savings account. Richard's legitimate business interests. You have every right to those." Dr. Rivera entered with Sarah's test results. "Good news, the contractions have stopped completely, and the baby's heart rate is strong. I think we can send you home tomorrow, but you'll need complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks." "Home?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "There are reporters camped outside my house. My husband had it under surveillance for a year. I don't even feel safe there anymore." "And what about staying with family?" "My sister Lisa is in Chicago with my daughter. Maybe I should join them." Margaret nodded. "That might be wise. Let things calm down here while you recover. I can handle the legal proceedings from here." That evening, as Sarah lay in the hospital bed watching the news coverage of Richard's case, she saw a familiar face on the television. Jessica Chen, leaving the courthouse with her high-powered attorney, looking composed and defiant. The reporter's voice filled the room. "Jessica Chen, former business partner and alleged mistress of accused embezzler Richard Mitchell, maintains her innocence in the financial crimes. Her attorney claims she was manipulated by Mitchell and is cooperating fully with federal investigators." Sarah reached for the remote and turned up the volume. "My client is a victim in this case," Jessica's attorney was saying. "She trusted Richard Mitchell both personally and professionally, and he exploited that trust to further his criminal enterprise. Ms. Chen had no knowledge of the embezzlement and is devastated to learn she was being used as part of an elaborate deception." The reporter continued. "Chen has reportedly provided investigators with evidence that Mitchell was planning to flee the country with stolen funds, leaving both his wife and his mistress to face the consequences of his crimes." Sarah muted the television and stared at Jessica's face on the screen. Even in crisis, Jessica looked polished and controlled, managing to present herself as another victim rather than a willing participant in destroying Sarah's life. But Sarah knew the truth. She had the recording of Jessica's confession, her gleeful admission of the affair, and her role in the financial manipulation. The question was whether anyone would care about the personal betrayal when $8 million in criminal fraud was involved. Her phone rang. Margaret's number. "Sarah, I just saw the news. We need to talk about Jessica's cooperation with the FBI." "What about it?" "If she's providing evidence against Richard in exchange for immunity on the financial crimes, her testimony could be crucial to your divorce case. But it also means she might try to minimize her role in the personal betrayal." "Let her try," Sarah said firmly. "I have evidence of her own words admitting to the affair and the psychological manipulation. The affair might be a sideshow to the federal case, but it's the main event in our divorce. Sarah, there's something else. The prosecutor wants to meet with you Monday morning. They think you might be able to provide insight into Richard's psychological state, his planning methods, his relationship with Jessica. They want me to help convict him." They want your perspective as someone who lived with him while he was committing these crimes. Your testimony could be the key to proving premeditation and ensuring he gets the maximum sentence. Sarah looked down at her belly, where her baby was finally resting peacefully after the day's drama. She thought about Lily, safe with her aunt but confused about why her father was on the news. She thought about all the employees and investors who trusted Richard and lost everything. Set up the meeting, Sarah said. It's time to make sure Richard faces the full consequences of his choices. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah felt the baby kick gently, as if in agreement. They were going to survive this, both of them. And when it was over, Richard Mitchell would spend the rest of his life paying for the lives he destroyed. The pregnant wife betrayed was about to become the state's star witness, and she was going to make sure justice was served. Tamonuan. The call came at 5 a.m. on Tuesday morning, jolting Sarah awake in her sister's guest bedroom in Chicago. Dr. Rivera's voice was calm but urgent. Sarah, I need you to get to the hospital immediately. We're seeing some concerning changes in your baby's heart rate, and I want to monitor you closely. Sarah's blood went cold. What kind of changes? Irregular patterns that suggest the baby might be under stress? It could be nothing, but at 34 weeks, we can't take any chances. How quickly can you get here? Lisa was already reaching for her car keys before Sarah hung up the phone. The 90-minute drive to the airport felt like an eternity, every minute filled with Sarah's desperate prayers that her baby would be okay. The flight to Seattle was a nightmare of turbulence and anxiety. Sarah sat gripping the armrests, feeling every bump as a potential threat to her child. The businessman next to her kept glancing at her with concern as she struggled to breathe through the panic. Are you okay, miss? He finally asked. I'm 34 weeks pregnant, and there might be something wrong with my baby, Sarah replied, tears streaming down her face. Without hesitation, the man flagged down a flight attendant and arranged for Sarah to be moved to first class, where she could lie down properly. I have 3 kids, he explained. I know what that fear feels like. At the Seattle airport, Margaret was waiting with a wheelchair and a direct route to the hospital. The media circus had died down slightly, but there were still photographers lurking, hoping for a dramatic shot of the pregnant wife of the embezzler. Any updates? Sarah asked as they raced through traffic. The baby's heart rate has stabilized, but Dr. Rivera wants to keep you under constant monitoring. Sarah, there's something else. Richard is demanding to be present for the birth. Absolutely not. He's claiming parental rights. His attorney filed an emergency motion this morning. Sarah felt a contraction grip her abdomen, stronger than any she'd experienced. Margaret, he's not getting anywhere near my baby. I don't care what rights he thinks he has. At the hospital, Dr. Rivera was waiting with a team of specialists. Sarah, I'm glad you're here. We need to talk about delivery options. The baby's showing signs of distress, and I think we should consider inducing labor. At 34 weeks, our NICU is excellent, and at 34 weeks, the survival rates are very good. I'm more concerned about leaving the baby under stress in utero. Sarah nodded, placing her hands on her belly. Whatever's safest for the baby. As the medical team prepared for induction, Margaret provided updates on the legal situation. I've filed an emergency restraining order to keep Richard away from the hospital. The judge granted it based on the evidence of his surveillance and psychological manipulation. What about Jessica? That's, complicated. She's been cooperating with the FBI, and her testimony has been crucial to the federal case. The prosecutor is recommending minimal charges in exchange for her cooperation. Sarah felt another contraction, stronger than before. So she gets away with it. With the financial crimes, possibly, but Sarah, she's facing her own kind of justice. The affair became public when Richard's case broke. She's lost her job, her reputation, most of her friends. Her cooperation with the FBI is being seen as betrayal by some people, loyalty by others. She's essentially been exiled from the business community. The contractions continued throughout the day, growing stronger and more regular. By evening, Sarah was in active labor, but something felt different from her pregnancy with Lily. Dr. Rivera, Sarah gasped between contractions. Something's wrong. This feels different. The doctor checked the monitors and her face grew serious. Sarah, I need to do an ultrasound right now. The ultrasound revealed a shock that nobody had expected. There were two babies. Twins. Sarah stared at the screen in disbelief. But every ultrasound has only shown one baby. Sometimes the second baby hides behind the first, especially early in pregnancy. This explains why you've been experiencing more stress than expected. You've been carrying twins this entire time. Sarah began to cry, overwhelmed by the magnitude of everything that was happening. Two babies, two innocent lives who would grow up without their father because he'd chosen crime and betrayal over family. Are they both okay? Baby A is in good position and doing well. Baby B is smaller and showing some distress. We need to deliver them soon. The delivery was intense but mercifully quick. Baby A daughter Sarah named Hope, arrived at 7:23 p.m. weighing 5 pounds, 2 ounces. Baby B, a son Sarah named Justice, followed at 7:31 p.m. weighing 4 pounds, 8 ounces. Both babies were immediately taken to the NICU, but their cries were strong and their initial assessments were positive. Sarah lay in the delivery room, exhausted but euphoric, when Margaret appeared with disturbing news. Sarah, Richard somehow found out about the birth. He's been calling the hospital, demanding information. His attorney is filing another motion claiming he has the right to see his children. Over my dead body. There's more. Jessica has been asking about visiting you. She claims she wants to apologize. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to process everything while her body recovered from the surprise delivery. Margaret, I want maximum security on this room and on the NICU. Nobody gets near my children without my explicit permission. Already done. I've also arranged for private security guards. That night, as Sarah tried to rest between trips to the NICU to see Hope and Justice, she received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Rivera entered her room with a concerned expression. Sarah, I need to tell you something about your pregnancy that we discovered during the delivery. What is it? The twins aren't identical, which means they were conceived at different times. It's rare, but it's called superfetation. You conceived twice, probably about 2 weeks apart. Sarah stared at the doctor, trying to understand the implications. What does that mean? It means one of the babies might not be Richard's. The words hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. That's impossible. I never... But even as she said it, Sarah remembered a night about 2 weeks before she discovered the affair. Richard had come home late from a business dinner, and they'd been intimate. But then she remembered another night, earlier, when Richard had been particularly attentive and loving, probably out of guilt about the affair. We can do paternity testing if you want to know for certain. Dr. Rivera offered. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the implications. If one of the babies wasn't Richard's, it would complicate the custody situation enormously, but it might also protect one of her children from Richard's influence. Yes, she said finally. I need to know. The paternity results came back 3 days later, while Sarah was in the NICU feeding Hope, who was thriving on breast milk and gaining weight steadily. Justice was still on breathing support but improving daily. Margaret delivered the news in person. Sarah, the results are unexpected. Tell me. Hope is Richard's biological daughter. Justice is not. Sarah looked down at the tiny boy in her arms, his perfect features peaceful in sleep. Then who? Sarah, do you remember having any intimate contact with anyone else around the time of conception? Sarah racked her brain, then suddenly remembered something that made her gasp. The fertility doctor, Dr. Harrison. What about him? When we were trying to conceive, he did an IUI procedure. But Richard wasn't available that day, so we used donor sperm as backup. I completely forgot. With everything that's happened, Margaret's eyes widened. So Justice was conceived through artificial insemination with donor sperm. It must have been, we did the procedure, and then Richard and I were intimate naturally a couple weeks later when I was still ovulating. Sarah, this changes everything. Richard has no legal claim to justice at all. For the first time in weeks, Sarah smiled genuinely. One of her children would be completely free from Richard's influence, completely protected from his manipulation and abuse. Margaret, I want this information sealed. I don't want Richard or anyone else to know about Justice's paternity until I decide what to do with it. Understood. But Sarah, this could be crucial leverage in the custody battle for Hope. Sarah looked at her two babies. Hope, who would always carry Richard's DNA but not his character. And Justice, who was a gift of science and fate that had protected him from Richard's poison. Let's focus on keeping Richard away from both of them for now, Sarah said. I'll figure out the rest later. As she sat in the NICU, feeding her twins and watching them grow stronger every day, Sarah realized that even in the midst of betrayal and destruction, life had given her unexpected gifts. Two perfect children who would grow up knowing the truth about their father, but also knowing they were loved unconditionally by their mother. The pregnant wife betrayed had become the mother of miracles, and she would protect those miracles with everything she had. 3 weeks after the twins' birth, Sarah sat in a federal courthouse waiting to testify against the man she'd once believed was the love of her life. Hope and Justice were finally home from the NICU, healthy and thriving, while Richard remained in federal custody awaiting trial. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Amanda Foster, had spent hours preparing Sarah for this moment. Remember, Sarah, you're not just testifying about the financial crimes, Amanda had explained. Your testimony about Richard's psychological manipulation, his long-term planning, and his complete lack of remorse will help establish the pattern of deliberate criminal behavior we need for the maximum sentence. Now, as Sarah walked into the courtroom, she saw Richard for the first time since his arrest. He looked smaller somehow, his expensive suits replaced by an orange jumpsuit, his confident swagger reduced to nervous fidgeting. But when their eyes met across the courtroom, Sarah saw something that chilled her to the bone. Rage. Pure, unadulterated fury directed entirely at her. Richard's attorney, an expensive defense lawyer named Harrison Burke, had built his case around the claim that Richard was a man driven to desperate acts by business pressures and personal crisis. He was planning to portray Sarah as an unsupportive wife who drove her husband to seek comfort elsewhere. Sarah took the witness stand and placed her hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth about the man who had systematically destroyed everything she'd believed about their life together. Mrs. Mitchell, Prosecutor Foster began, can you tell the court about your marriage to the defendant? I thought we had a loving, supportive marriage, Sarah replied, her voice steady. I believed Richard when he told me he was working late to provide for our family. I trusted him completely with our finances, our future, our children's security. When did you first become aware that something was wrong? Sarah described finding the messages on Richard's computer, the discovery of the affair, the revelation about the stolen money. She told the court about the forged signatures, the surveillance cameras, the detailed diary of manipulation tactics. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm going to show you evidence item 47. Do you recognize this document? Sarah looked at the papers and nodded. This is Richard's diary, where he documented his plans to gaslight me about my mental health. He wrote about how my hormonal behavior during pregnancy would make it easier to convince people I was unstable. A murmur went through the courtroom. Even the judge looked disturbed. Can you read the entry dated March 15th for the court? Sarah's voice remained steady as she read Richard's own words. Sarah becoming suspicious about late nights. Need to increase gaslighting about her hormonal behavior. Jessica suggested we plant seeds about postpartum depression for later use. The key is to make her doubt her own perceptions while documenting her erratic behavior for future custody proceedings. When it was the defense attorney's turn, Burke tried to paint Sarah as a neglectful wife who had driven Richard to desperation. Mrs. Mitchell, isn't it true that you gave up your career and became completely financially dependent on my client? I gave up my career to raise our daughter and support Richard's business endeavors. Yes. And isn't it true that this created enormous pressure on my client to provide for a family that was entirely dependent on his success? Sarah looked directly at Richard as she answered, Mr. Burke, your client wasn't under pressure to provide for his family. He was under pressure to fund an elaborate double life that included expensive gifts for his mistress, luxury hotel rooms for their affairs, and ultimately a plan to abandon his family entirely. But you acknowledge that your financial dependence created stress in the marriage. I acknowledge that Richard chose to steal over $8 million rather than have an honest conversation about our financial needs. I acknowledge that he chose to document my daily life with hidden cameras rather than discuss his feelings openly. I acknowledge that he chose to forge my signature on financial documents rather than ask for my input on major decisions. Burke tried several more approaches, but Sarah was unshakable. Every question gave her an opportunity to reveal another layer of Richard's deception, another example of his calculated cruelty. The most powerful moment came when Foster asked Sarah about the impact on their children. Mrs. Mitchell, you gave birth to twins shortly after discovering your husband's crimes. Can you tell the court about that experience? I went into premature labor because of the stress Richard's betrayal caused. Our babies were born at 34 weeks and spent weeks in the NICU. While I was fighting to keep our children alive, Richard was in jail because he chose criminal activity over his family's welfare. What is your greatest fear for your children moving forward? Sarah looked directly at the jury as she answered. My greatest fear is that Richard will try to manipulate and control my children the same way he manipulated and controlled me. He spent years documenting my behavior to use against me in custody proceedings. He planned to gaslight me about my mental health to gain advantage in our divorce. A man who would do that to his wife would absolutely do it to his children. When Sarah stepped down from the witness stand, she felt a weight she'd been carrying for months finally lift from her shoulders. She'd told the truth, the whole truth, and she'd done it with dignity and strength. But the most shocking moment of the trial was yet to come. As the prosecution prepared to rest their case, Jessica Chen entered the courthouse to give her testimony. Sarah watched from the gallery as her former best friend took the witness stand. Jessica looked different, thinner, less polished, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. The confident woman who had gloated about stealing Sarah's husband was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely broken. Under oath, Jessica confirmed every detail of Richard's financial crimes. But when the prosecutor asked about the personal relationship, Jessica's testimony took an unexpected turn. Ms. Chen, can you describe the nature of your relationship with the defendant? Richard told me his marriage was over emotionally, that he and Sarah were only staying together for their daughter. He said Sarah was cold, uninterested in his success, and that their relationship had become purely transactional. Sarah felt anger rise in her chest, but she forced herself to listen. Did you believe these statements? Jessica was quiet for a long moment. I wanted to believe them, but over time, I began to see how Richard manipulated everyone around him, including me. He told me what I wanted to hear, to get what he wanted from me. What did he want from you? Initially, I thought he wanted a partner who shared his ambition, but I eventually realized he wanted someone who would help him steal from his own company and abandon his family without asking questions. The prosecutor pressed further. Mrs. Chen, did there come a time when you realized you were being manipulated? Yes. When I discovered he was planning to frame me for the embezzlement and disappear with all the money. He never intended to build a life with me. I was just another victim in his scheme. Sarah watched Jessica's face as she testified, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But what she saw instead was something she'd never expected to see from Jessica: genuine remorse. Ms. Chen, do you have anything you'd like to say to the victims of these crimes? Jessica looked directly at Sarah as she answered. I'm deeply sorry for my role in destroying innocent lives. I convinced myself that what I was doing was justified because I believed Richard's lies about his marriage. But there's no excuse for participating in the destruction of a family, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for the pain I've caused. After Jessica's testimony, the prosecution rested their case. The defense tried to argue that Richard was a man driven to desperation by circumstances beyond his control, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and racketeering. Richard was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 15 years. As the judge read the sentence, Sarah felt no joy, only a profound sense of closure. Justice had been served, but the cost had been enormous for everyone involved. Outside the courthouse, Jessica approached Sarah as reporters shouted questions from behind police barriers. "Sarah," Jessica said quietly, "I know you have no reason to listen to me, but I need you to know something." Sarah looked at the woman who had once been her closest friend, now a stranger marked by guilt and loss. "I recorded every conversation I had with Richard about his plans to destroy you psychologically. I've given those recordings to your attorney. If he ever tries to get custody or contact with your children, you'll have evidence of his stated intentions to manipulate them." "Why?" Sarah asked simply. "Because I realized too late that what we did to you was unforgivable. I can't undo the damage, but I can make sure your children are protected from him." Jessica walked away without another word, leaving Sarah standing on the courthouse steps with the weight of everything that had happened settling around her like snow. The pregnant wife betrayed had finally gotten justice, but the real work of rebuilding her life was just beginning. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the kitchen of her new home, a modest but comfortable house in a safe neighborhood with excellent schools, preparing breakfast for 3-year-old Lily and the twins, who were now healthy, happy 1-year-olds crawling everywhere and getting into everything. The house was smaller than the mansion she'd shared with Richard, but it was truly hers. The divorce settlement had been complicated by the criminal case, but ultimately Sarah had recovered enough assets to ensure her children's future was secure. More importantly, she'd recovered herself. The morning routine had become her favorite part of each day. Lily helping with Hope's breakfast while Justice banged his sippy cup on his high-chair tray, demanding attention. The chaos of single motherhood that had once terrified her now felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Mommy, when is Uncle David coming over?" Lily asked, referring to Dr. David Martinez, the therapist Sarah had been seeing to process the trauma of Richard's betrayal. Over the months, their professional relationship had slowly evolved into something deeper and more personal. "He'll be here for dinner," Sarah replied, wiping Justice's face as he grinned at her with 4 tiny teeth. "Are you excited to show him your art project?" "Yes, I made a picture of our family." Sarah's heart warmed as she looked at Lily's drawing stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. 4 stick figures labeled Mommy, Lily, Hope, and Justice stood in front of a house under a bright yellow sun. There was no figure for Richard. Lily had processed her father's absence with the resilience of childhood, especially with the help of family therapy sessions. The doorbell rang, and Sarah opened it to find David holding flowers and wearing the gentle smile that had helped her heal from months of emotional devastation. "How are my favorite people today?" he asked, scooping Lily into a hug while the twins babbled excitedly from their high chairs. "We're good," Sarah replied, and meant it completely for the first time in over a year. Over dinner, David mentioned some news that made Sarah pause. "I heard Richard's appeal was denied. The conviction is final." Sarah nodded, feeling only a distant sadness for the man Richard could have been if he'd made different choices. 25 years. He'll be in his 70s when he gets out. "Any regrets about testifying?" "None," Sarah said firmly. "He destroyed too many lives for me to feel sorry for him facing the consequences." After dinner, while David helped Lily with homework and the twins played on their activity mat, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number, which she normally wouldn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello, Sarah." The voice was unmistakably Jessica's, though she sounded different, older, more tired. "Jessica, how did you get this number?" I need to see you. There's something you need to know about Richard, about everything that happened. Something I never told the FBI. Sarah felt her stomach clench. Jessica, whatever it is, I'm not interested. My life is good now. I don't want to revisit any of that. Sarah, please. Richard didn't just betray you and steal money. There's something else, something that affects your children's safety. What are you talking about? I can't discuss it over the phone. Can I come to your house or meet you somewhere? It's about justice. The mention of her son's name made Sarah's blood run cold. What about justice? Please, Sarah, 1 hour of your time, and then I'll disappear from your life forever. But you need to know this. Against her better judgment, Sarah agreed to meet Jessica at a coffee shop across town. She asked David to stay with the children, claiming a work emergency. An hour later, Sarah sat across from Jessica in a dimly lit corner booth, studying the woman who had once destroyed her life. Jessica looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past 12 months. Her hair was shorter and less styled. Her clothes expensive but somehow sad. Her face marked by stress and what looked like genuine remorse. Thank you for coming, Jessica said quietly. I know you have every reason to hate me. I don't hate you anymore, Sarah replied honestly. I've moved past that, but I need to know what this is about. Jessica pulled out a manila envelope and set it on the table between them. Richard wasn't just embezzling money from the company, he was selling information. What kind of information? Personal information about employees, their families, their children, social security numbers, addresses, medical records, school information. He'd built a database of over 3,000 people and was selling it to identity theft rings. Sarah stared at Jessica in horror. That's why you're here, to tell me about more of Richard's crimes? No, I'm here because your family was in that database. All of you. Lily's school records, your medical information, the twins' birth certificates. Sarah, Richard sold your children's identities to criminals. The coffee shop seemed to spin around Sarah as the implication sank in. What does that mean? It means there are people out there with access to your children's personal information. It means someone could use their identities to open credit accounts, apply for government benefits, even create false documents. How do you know this? Because I helped him compile some of the data, Jessica admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought we were just organizing employee records for legitimate business purposes. I didn't realize what he was really doing until after his arrest, when I found encrypted files on his computer. Sarah felt rage building in her chest, but not at Jessica this time. Why didn't you tell the FBI? I tried, but by the time I figured it out, the statute of limitations had run out on some of the sales. The FBI said there wasn't enough evidence to bring additional charges. But Sarah, they told me to warn the victims. Jessica pushed the envelope across the table. This contains everything I could recover about what information was sold and to whom. There are instructions for protecting your children's identities, contact information for credit monitoring services, everything you need to keep them safe. Sarah opened the envelope with shaking hands and saw photocopies of documents that made her sick. Justice's birth certificate, Hope's medical records, Lily's school enrollment forms, all stamped with codes that indicated they'd been sold to criminal networks. Jessica, this is 3,000 people's personal information being sold to identity thieves, and the FBI can't do anything about it. They're working on it, but these networks are sophisticated. The damage is already done for most of the victims. Sarah looked up from the documents, studying Jessica's face. Why are you really telling me this? Why risk reaching out to me when you could have just mailed this information anonymously? Jessica was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with more honesty than Sarah had ever heard from her. Because I realized that destroying your family wasn't just collateral damage in Richard's schemes. It was the plan all along. He didn't just want to steal money and run away with me. He wanted to completely annihilate any trace of his old life, including making sure your children could be victimized for years to come. And you're telling me this now because I have a son. Sarah's eyes widened. What Richard's son? Born 8 months ago, and when I realized what Richard had done to your children's identities, I understood that he would do the same thing to his own child if it served his purposes. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. You have Richard's baby. I was pregnant when he was arrested. I never told him because I realized by then that he was a monster who would use his own child as a weapon if it benefited him. Sarah stared at Jessica, trying to process this information. Where is the baby now? Safe, with my parents in another state, under a different last name. I'm never going to tell Richard he exists. Jessica, that's his child. Whatever Richard did, that baby is innocent. Exactly, which is why Richard will never know about him. I've seen what he's capable of. Sarah, I won't let him destroy another innocent life. Sarah looked at the documents spread between them, evidence of crimes that would affect her children for years, possibly decades. But she also saw something else, a woman who had finally understood the true nature of the man they'd both been involved with. What do you want from me, Jessica? Nothing. I just wanted you to have the information you need to protect your children. And I wanted to apologize, not just for the affair, but for not realizing sooner that Richard was a predator who destroys everyone who gets close to him. As they parted ways in the parking lot, Jessica turned back one more time. Sarah, your children are lucky to have you as their mother. You saved them from him. Driving home, Sarah's mind raced with the implications of what she learned. Richard's evil had extended far beyond what anyone had realized, and the effects would continue long after his imprisonment. But as she walked into her house and saw David reading bedtime stories to Lily while the twins slept peacefully in their cribs, Sarah realized something important. Richard had tried to destroy her family, but he had failed. Her children were safe, loved, and growing up with truth instead of lies. She had built a new life based on honesty, trust, and genuine love. The pregnant wife betrayed had become a woman who couldn't be broken. And no matter what other secrets emerged from Richard's past, Sarah knew she was strong enough to protect her family from all of them. As she tucked Lily into bed and kissed the sleeping twins goodnight, Sarah whispered a promise that she intended to keep for the rest of her life. No one will ever hurt you the way your father hurt me. I promise. The story of betrayal had ended. The story of healing had just begun.